I'm going to hand you straight over to Miss Burrell, and she's going to introduce our speaker today. So please give your best attention, and we take questions at the end. So if you have any thoughts, write them down so you can ask a question. They're all you, Miss Burrell.
All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your presence and attention. The month of April is a special one as it celebrates the one thing that we all have in common, which is diversity. Since the start of the school year, beginning with Latinx Heritage Month, we have been putting forth stronger efforts to recognize and bring attention to the diversity that's around us here at Lamont. And this month is dedicated really to reflecting on how we are upholding our inclusion statement and being mindful of the diversity around us. And today we have a very diverse guest with us that I am proud to introduce, Miss Lena Tibebe. Lena is an Ethiopian-born, Michigan-raised educator and cycling enthusiast. Inspired to incite change in her community, she has found a permanent home in the New York City Public School System as an ESL, or as we know, ELL specialist, and film teacher, and as a beloved leader of Ride to DC, which we'll learn more about later. A ride recognizing the existence and significance of Black lives in America, equally fueled by the desire to recognize the existence and significance of Black lives. The Ride to DC model was created, vowing to raise awareness, increase accessibility, and cultivate a culture of diversity in the cycling community. And it has this very special quote associated with it, which is, "Let us bike on till victory is won." So I'm going to hand you over now to Miss Lena Tibebe, and I will have her take it away. Thank you for joining us. Let's give her some virtual applause.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Mustapha, who is the father of one of the students here, who was able to be the mediator. And I want to thank every single one of you for holding space for me to just share a story in my narrative. And I hope that it can inspire every single one of you guys, or at least one person, which will hopefully create a domino effect. Okay, well, should I share my screen or perfect. Okay, so I have a short PowerPoint for you guys on the topic of women of color leading the 2020 protests. I've never really seen myself as a leader. Yes, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, and yes, I was once a manager in the corporate world, but I never had seen myself as a leader until this past summer. So it's really interesting to be called out and to be asked to be, to speak about being a leader in 2020 out of all the years. So I'm excited to be here. So one thing that I like to do is to have an intention or a focus or a question throughout my day, throughout a lesson, throughout basically everything in my life. So one question that I have for myself and for you all today is, how can we be active participants in the progression of change that we want to see, that we want to have in this world, to make life better for all? In short, what I'm basically asking is, how can I help make life better for all? Not just for myself, but for my brothers and sisters, for my neighbors, for the people that live on the other side of town, right? So that's the focus that I have for this meeting, and I hope that you guys can start asking yourselves throughout this, not lesson, but throughout this this speech, and throughout the rest of your life, how can I make life better for myself and for those around me and for society as a whole? If you could go to the next slide. I like to start everything off with just the simple phrase, which is, I'm an imperfect human in an imperfect world. This helps it grounds me in a sense, because it helps me understand that, yes, I am a human being. I'm not superhuman. I will make mistakes throughout this meeting. I will also make mistakes, and it's okay. But I also should expect that from others as well. Expect the best, but also understand that we are human beings, and if we are human, then there's some sort of imperfection within us, and that's fine. What matters more is the steps that we take to make ourselves better. So I'm an imperfect human in an imperfect world. I'm not striving to be perfect, but I'm striving to be better than what I was yesterday. So that's who I am in a little bit. We will quickly go through some slides with images. So the next slide shows a little bit about what Miss Burrell had said. I'm Ethiopian born, Michigan raised. I'm actually half Ethiopian, half Eritrean. These are just a few images of some of the tribes that I'm associated with: the Amara, the Oromo, the Wallo, the Tigray tribe. So that's just a little bit about who I am, some parts of my culture. I went from Ethiopia to Michigan because of, well, it's a refugee story if you think about it. There was a there was conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and my family had to flee the country for safety. We went to Michigan, out of all places, in the middle of winter. So that was interesting. And then if you can go to the next slide, I went through the public school system in the suburbs of Michigan. Went to Michigan State University. I highly suggest if anyone who's interested in business, hospitality business specifically, education, if you're thinking of college, Michigan State University has a really good hospitality business and education program. And then like I said, I worked for the corporate world for a little bit. And I decided that this life is not for me. It's not meant for me. I am not creating the impact that I want to make. I wanted to make direct impact on lives rather than creating money for an organization, though it was a very comfortable position. I left to become an educator. So if you can go to the next slide. I decided to change my career from supply chain management to TESOL, so teaching English to speakers of other languages, and then I became an English as a new language teacher, ENL or ELL specialist as they would call it, at Lehman, and I've been teaching since. So throughout this time, I've had just this normal life, trying to figure out who I am, where do I fit in, what are the things that I like, things that you guys are probably thinking about now, identity, where do I belong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was going through this normal path until, summer of 2020. So if you can go to the next slide. These are just some of the things that I was interested in, right? And then summer of 2020 came, and I will say for myself and the people that I know that it was a transformative year for us. Last year in general, it was very transformative. We had a pandemic, and then all of a sudden, the death of George Floyd occurred. And it was an impactful moment for myself and for those around me. And it changed me, and it made me just stop for a second and think, what is going on? What is happening here? Why is this happening? And what can be done to change it, right? So then I started to observe, to see how people were reacting, and also trying to understand internally what my reactions are to this. And so I went out, I started to take photos, and I started to create, as I went out and observed what was going on with all of these protests. And what's really interesting is that throughout this entire time with the protests, there were a lot of leaders that were under the age of 25. Most of the people that were leading the movement in New York City were very young. There were 18-year-olds leading marches of thousands of people. And it was quite interesting to see how people were reacting in a way that was peaceful, and protests can be peaceful as well. So these are just some of the photos that I took. And then if you can go to the next slide. And so, some of you might ask, how does someone like me, an imperfect human in an imperfect world, get on the Washington Post, right? There's something that happened in between. Well, essentially, I asked myself the same question that I started off with at the beginning of the slide, which is, how can I how can I help? How can I be an active participant in creating the change that I want to see in the world today? And I'm usually not the type of person that's over the top, type A. I have to have everything in my bubble or in my, box. But I just decided to think about one area that I could just focus on and know that I can make some sort of an impact, even if it's one life. And so I looked at my bike and I said to myself, well, maybe I can change the world or change my surroundings or myself and some people around me with using a bike as a tool. I noticed that some people had used photography, their camera, and that was their way of creating change. And some people would use sports as their way of change. So then I thought, why not use a bike? And so I created an organization with a group of people who had similar mindsets as me. And we decided, okay, why not just create an organization that allows any individual, regardless of race, class, ethnicity, gender, and so on, why not just create an organization where people can use cycling as a way to build a community, to unite people of diverse backgrounds, to create a home, to create a family. And I truly do believe that one of the most radical things that you can do is to unite people that are completely different from each other, because then people start seeing each other as human beings rather than classifications like race, gender, religion, and so on. So that was somewhat of a start of Right to DC. There was a March on Washington, which was happening on the 27th of August. I looked at my bike one day and I thought, why not just bike to DC? Crazy idea. Never biked over 50 miles in my life, but I used to run half marathons. And I said to myself, let's do this. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I can create a change. I didn't know what would happen next. If anything, no one would show up and it would just me biking to DC. But at least I'm doing something, and I'm doing it with a cause and a purpose. And if I can't change someone else's life, I can change my own. And so that is how Right to DC began. And if you can go to the next slide. But one thing I enjoy doing as with a linguistics background is I always have to make sure I have my own personal understanding and definition of what social activism is. What does it mean to be an activist? Sometimes people will consider me as an activist, but at that time I had to create my own definition. I had to internalize, what is activism to me? How can I consider myself an activist, and what does it mean to be an activist? So I created a short list from a website that I found actually. So I will link the site in these slides later on. But social activism is an intentional action with the goal of bringing about social change. It's not something extravagant where you have to write a 5-page essay about it. An activist is literally anyone who's fighting for change in society. If you wanted to create change within, let's say that you are in a culture that's a little, manipulative or something. And if you wanted to create social change, you can do so. You can consider yourself as an activist when you are fighting for something that impacts the lives of those around you. And if you feel like strongly about a cause and are working towards change, you can consider yourself as an activist. So these are just a few definitions that I was able to find and kind of parse for you all. So if you were ever wondering, how can I help and how can I be an activist? First, understand, if you are acting on the belief that you have, which will then create an end goal of change in society, you are being an activist. Okay. So, next slide. So Right to DC, let me tell you a little bit about what we did. I told you the beginning story of it, which is me sitting on my chair, staring at my bike and wondering, what if I just biked to the second March on Washington, this monumental event, second ever March on Washington, the first time Martin Luther King had basically spoke his famous speech, which is the I Have a Dream speech, which talked about unity. And so I wanted to create an organization that allowed people to unite, to come together for a cause, to build relationship and community, which was really hard at that time, especially during, a time of just isolation. And we all biked together. We all went through the same journey, regardless of who you are or what you consider yourself as. You are going through the same journey from beginning to end. You're going through the same struggle, the same victories, the same resilience from beginning to end, with the end goal of being to attend the March on Washington. So that happened on the 22nd. We got there on the 27th and attended the March on Washington on the 28th. So the event, as Ms. Burrell mentioned, it was a ride to recognize the significance and the existence and the significance of Black lives. We are now switching the name from Ride to DC as a location to Ride to Diversifying Cycling, because we want to be able to have as many people with different backgrounds to come together and to bike, because there's so many benefits to biking. There's health benefits. When you think about it, it's a form of exercise. It's also psychologically, when we talk about mental health, there are many benefits to it as well. Whenever I ride my bike, I feel a sense of freedom, of empowerment. It's a way for me to just mobilize myself. I can go, and it's empowering as well. I can go to New Jersey if I wanted to. And just knowing that I have that power makes me feel better about my life and about myself. Can you please go to the next slide? And as mentioned, the organization has 3 pillars, which is to cultivate culture. Everyone and anyone that comes in should be able to feel as if they're entering a home, a place of belonging, and a community where every member feels as if they are part of a family. We want to increase accessibility. There are certain neighborhoods that you'll notice once you start biking that have better bike lanes, period, better bike lanes and better infrastructures for bikes. And there's others that just have everything that you need. We want to be able to create more access to bikes in neighborhoods that are deserts, that have bike deserts, if you think about it. We want to be able to have more BIPOCs, Black, Indigenous people of color, to have access to affordable bikes, roads, and cycling infrastructures. And we also just want to raise awareness that in at least America, there is this racial disparity within the cycling community. When I think of Kenya or Ethiopia, right, there are bikes available, and it doesn't matter what your color is. It's more of everyone can have access to a bike. But over here, race and gender seems to be a major issue when it comes to cycling. So we want to just raise awareness to the fact that there is this issue, and we need to do something about it. Next slide, please. And so a group of us came together, half of us being women or identifying as female, and we decided to create this organization where we were fighting for those 3 pillars. And the first action that we took was this ride to DC. Next slide. So during the ride, we biked over 304 miles. Some even did 350, I don't know how. And we climbed over 15,000 feet in elevation. So just to give you some sort of image or a picture of it, 15,000 feet is half of Mount Everest. So in a sense, in the 5-6 days that we were biking, we basically biked half of Mount Everest, which was intense. If you can go to the next slide. We also camped 4 nights in a row. This was an experience for a lot of the New Yorkers that joined us, because they had not camped at all. So this was an educational experience for a lot, including myself. Camping was never something that my family did. It is not part of the Ethiopian Eritrean culture, but it was an educational experience, and being around nature is good for your mental health. So this was something that we did intentionally. Next slide. And speaking of intention, each day we had a focus. So if you were a rider, you were doing classwork, homework, and all the above. We started each morning off with the intention. So one intention was resilience, one intention was struggle, one intention was privilege. So the first day was privilege, and we wanted to let every single person in the room know that being able to do a ride like this is a privilege. Everyone here, regardless of who you are privileged to be in this place right now, to be able to do a 5-day bike tour. And so we focused on that. We had group discussions like you would have in your classes. We had guest speakers as well. So this is a historian from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, who came and spoke to the group about the history of the location that we're in. So it wasn't only a fun ride, it wasn't only a protest ride, but it was an educational experience as well. We also had protests too. So we decided to go to an area on the east side of Baltimore, and we protested in this particular neighborhood that has been disadvantaged and disenfranchised for decades. If you were to walk in the neighborhood, you'd see homes without windows, boarded up, no ceiling, yet people still live there. You'd see poverty, extreme poverty in this particular neighborhood, and we decided to pick this neighborhood and protest in and said, you know what, hey, we're here biking from New York, here in this specific neighborhood, just to tell you that your life matters and that we care. So we did that in Baltimore and DC. Next slide. And last but not least, we attended the second March on Washington, which was a monumental experience. And this is just a picture of the leadership team that decided to do this within 33 days. I forgot to mention this. We only had 33 days to plan this March on Washington. I mean, not the March on Washington, but this bike tour, which is extremely intense. And I don't suggest that, that anyone does this. Okay, and last but not least, we built a community of cyclists that have now become family. So we have over 125 cyclists that consider each other as brothers and sisters. And these are, I would say 30 to 40% of the cyclists were minorities. Almost half were female. And it's interesting to see how we were able to build a community that, and I mentioned this many times, that look past these identifiers, these classifiers, these physical traits, and look into a person and say, hey, I'm human, I'm imperfect, you're human and you're imperfect, but I want to build a relationship with you. I want to understand you as a person, and I want to be able to see you as a brother, as a sister, a cousin, just family. And so that is the event Ride to DC. And in the future, we're planning on creating opportunities for youth, for high school students like yourselves, to join us on this amazing experience. Though there may not be a March on Washington, the whole entire experience of biking from New York City to Washington, DC in itself is a transformative experience. So that is who we are, that is who I am. Does anyone have questions for me? Personal questions or life questions, or about Ride to DC? I am open and ready.
So guys, if you just put your hand up electronically and I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and speak. So Julian Rodriguez, you're first up. So unmute yourself, Julian, and fire away.
Okay, so did you guys just bike for the straight day hours, until the sun went down, and then camped?
Yeah, so usually we biked around 55. The first 2 days was 55 miles, and the last 3 days were closer to 65 to 75 miles. which is a lot, especially for beginners. A lot of our riders were actually relatively new, as in 3 months old on a bike as an adult. So yeah, we biked and then we camped. We had rest stops in between. So we were able to feed all of our riders. It was a fully supported bike ride. So no one had to carry their bags or anything. We carried it for them. No one had to worry about what they're eating. We had food for them.
Thanks, Julian. Genevieve, you can unmute yourself and fire away.
So do you do this, like, was this a one-time thing, or do you do it like every month or every 2 months?
Yeah, so the Ride to DC will be a yearly event, and every summer we're planning on hosting a once a month community ride, which will kind of resemble what Ride to DC will look like. So our first one will start at the end of the month, at the end of April, yeah, this month, or May, where we will host community rides. So you'll get to see a day in the life of Ride to DC through that monthly ride. We also have bi-weekly rides as well that we're rolling out, which are smaller, and it's mostly just going around prospect laps. And in that specific event, we're focusing more on community engagement. We want to be able to have our riders meet each other to, build some sort of foundation before the Ride to DC. So those are two of the events that we're rolling.
I have another question. Is there like a limit of people?
Yes. So right now, last year we weren't able to accommodate all of the riders that were interested in it. In our first interest form, there are over 600 people that showed interest, and in our second interest form, which had the price, which had the requirements, there are over 220. But because of COVID, we had asked actually everyone to test prior to, being part of this trip, and they have to quarantine if we realized that they had disrespected those two rules from us. Then they were canceled. They were not canceled, but they were not allowed to participate in the event. But this year there will be a limit. We are trying to figure out exactly what that limit is, but it'll more than likely be closer to 200 to 300 riders.
Thanks, Genevieve. Jasmine, you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I was just wondering if you have any tips for teenagers who want to be involved with activism, but obviously have like a limited budget and can't really go out and do much. What can you do?
That's a great question. I will start off by saying I myself did not have a budget when creating Ride to DC. And to be an activist, it doesn't mean you need to do something grand, right? An activist could be just you speaking out against injustice, right? Like when it's like the phrase that you see on the subway. When you see something, say something, right? Being an activist could just be you using your voice as a tool for change. If it means sharing this one post that says, hey, this isn't right, then let that be. An activist could be you making a phone call to your local or state legislators and saying, this law is impacting certain communities and it should be changed, right? An activist doesn't have to be you going out and doing something grand. It could be something as simple as you just using your voice. It could be as simple as you becoming friends with someone that no one wants to eat lunch with, right? Saying, hey, I'm going to advocate for you. It could be used making sure that someone isn't using implicit bias, and so on.
Thank you, Jasmine. Great question. With the limits of time, we're just going to have one more question. So, Ione, please ask your question.
I had a question about like what the sign-up process for this would look like. Like, how would you kind of apply if you were interested?
Yes. So right now we do not have an interest form out yet, but if you don't mind going to the last page, the last slide, I mean, of the PowerPoint presentation, I had a few questions for you guys. It's okay. You can think about it. I think it's slide 24, 25, the last slide. One more. Perfect. So if you're interested in learning more about Right to DC, or if you have any questions for me that you were not able to ask, I know that there are a few people that had raised their hands. You can ask me personally at lena@righttodc.com. If you have any general questions, you can email info@righttodc.com, or you can hit us up on Instagram. But Ione, correct? Ionia?
Ione. Yeah.
Ione, sorry about that. Just send me an email and I will give you all the information that you need. All right.
Lena, thank you so much. I'm completely inspired by you, and I feel very lucky that you came to speak to us, and I hope the students feel the same, as I have no doubt they do. Students, thank you all for your attention. I appreciate you. You can log off and head to class, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Good rest of your day.
You too. Enjoy the rest of your week.